Carl Jung warned that every person carries a shadow, a hidden side of the psyche that grows darker the more it is denied. The less we acknowledge this part of ourselves, the more dangerous it becomes, lurking beneath the surface until it bursts forth without warning. A conscious weakness can be corrected, but what is repressed festers. The shadow hides in silence, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. It sabotages good intentions, derails relationships, and erupts as anger, cruelty, or irrational behavior. What we refuse to face eventually controls us. The shadow is not abstract philosophy, but lived reality. It appears in sudden hostility during conversation, in envy when others succeed, or in guilt after unexplained actions. These slips reveal what we deny. The darker we make the shadow, the greater its power over our lives. Jung's warning was clear. If we continue to repress and isolate the shadow from our conscious mind, it remains uncorrected, and one day it will erupt. No amount of denial protects us. Avoidance only feeds the darkness. Awareness alone gives us a chance to master it. The shadow grows strongest where denial is deepest. Every trait we hide, every impulse we suppress, gathers strength in the dark. By refusing to face our flaws, we hand them secret power. The unseen eventually governs our choices, shaping outcomes we never consciously intended. Control does not come from fighting what is hidden, but from acknowledging it. When fear, envy, or anger remain unconscious, they erupt at the worst moments. What you will not admit in yourself appears in your actions, and those actions silently dictate the course of your life. History shows that avoidance always backfires. Individuals who suppress their weaknesses project them onto others, creating conflict and division. Societies that deny their collective darkness repeat atrocities. Whether personal or cultural, the law is the same. Denial breeds domination, but awareness brings freedom. Jung's insight remains timeless. To pretend perfection is to invite collapse. Wholeness comes from embracing both light and dark, strengths and weaknesses. What you dare to face becomes your teacher. What you refuse to face becomes your master. This is the shadow's warning to the world. Carl Jung described the personal shadow as the thing a person has no wish to be. It is the sum of traits, impulses, and qualities we refuse to acknowledge. These are the parts of ourselves that feel unacceptable, shameful, weak, or threatening to our self-image. The shadow includes anger we deny, jealousy we mask, and selfishness we bury under politeness. It contains fears and vulnerabilities that clash with the role we try to play in society. We spend enormous energy hiding these qualities, yet they never disappear. They remain, waiting. Moments of stress or loss often pull back the mask. A careless insult slips from the tongue. A surge of rage emerges without warning. A secret envy leaks into a comment. These glimpses reveal the shadow breaking through, exposing the part of us we reject. Paradoxically, the harder we try to eliminate these traits, the stronger they become. Suppression makes the shadow darker, denser, and more dangerous. The thing we fear becoming lurks inside us. To deny it is to feed it. To admit it is the first step toward mastery. The shadow is most visible in moments when control weakens. Under stress, anxiety, or fear, hidden traits emerge. A person who believes himself kind may lash out with cruelty. Another who values honesty may suddenly lie. These eruptions reveal qualities long buried beneath the surface. Alcohol often loosens the grip of the conscious ego, allowing the shadow to break through. Remarks spoken in drunken anger or inappropriate behavior at parties are not accidents. They are glimpses of the repressed self. The mask falls away, and the shadow speaks in its raw voice. Sudden hostility during a friendly conversation is another clear sign. The unconscious pushes forward a truth we try to deny. An insult slips out, followed by embarrassment or shame. In such moments, the shadow exposes itself, reminding us that what is repressed never disappears, but waits. These eruptions should not be dismissed as random mistakes. They are signals pointing to the unseen. Anxiety, intoxication, or sudden outbursts are mirrors of what we avoid. The more we ignore them, the stronger they become. The shadow grows in silence until it demands recognition. Projection is the shadow's favorite disguise. Instead of admitting envy, anger, or weakness within, we see it in others. The qualities we refuse to face in ourselves are pushed outward, painted onto friends, enemies, or strangers. We condemn them for what secretly belongs to us. This explains why certain people irritate us instantly. Their behavior triggers discomfort, not because it is truly intolerable, but because it mirrors something hidden within. The anger we feel toward them is often the anger we deny in ourselves. What we reject internally, we attack externally. Projection allows the ego to remain innocent. By blaming others, we escape self-examination. Yet this escape is costly. Relationships are poisoned by accusations. Trust is eroded, and conflicts intensify. In reality, the fight is not with them, but with the unacknowledged shadow inside us. Jung insisted that recognition of projection is essential. When you realize that the traits you despise in others reflect your own hidden self, the illusion shatters. This is painful but liberating. The shadow loses its grip the moment you admit that what you feared was already within. The greatest battles are not fought on battlefields, but within the human soul. The enemies we see outside often reflect the shadows we ignore inside. We condemn cruelty, yet harbor resentment. We despise dishonesty, yet twist the truth ourselves. The outer conflict mirrors the inner war. Jung warned that the more we externalize the enemy, the less we understand ourselves. Hatred projected outward blinds us to the same seeds within. To fight only the external foe is to remain divided. True victory requires confronting the darkness we carry in our own psyche. The paradox is unsettling. The tyrant we fear in society is echoed by the tyrant inside us who seeks control. The liar we condemn in others whispers within our own mind. The enemy is not only them. The enemy is also us. Recognizing this truth is not self-blame, but self-liberation. Once you admit the enemy lives within, you reclaim power. By owning your shadow, you stop being controlled by it. The war outside may continue, but inside you discover peace through the courage to face yourself. The shadow is often seen only as darkness, but Jung reminded us it also carries light. Buried within are instincts that keep us alive, creative sparks that inspire art, and insights that cut through illusion. Ignoring the shadow means losing access to these hidden treasures. A person who represses anger may also repress assertiveness. In fearing aggression, they bury confidence and the ability to defend themselves. Likewise, someone who rejects selfishness may suppress healthy self-respect. The shadow holds both poison and medicine, both destructive impulses and essential strengths waiting to be claimed. Shadow work reveals that what we fear can become fuel. The very emotions we hide can be transformed into courage, passion, and resilience. Creativity often rises from darkness. Pain can give birth to beauty. The shadow conceals not only flaws, but the raw material of greatness. To deny the shadow is to deny wholeness. Integration is not about eliminating darkness, but discovering the gifts hidden inside it. Jung's lesson is clear. The shadow is not only what you reject, it is also what you desperately need. The gold is hidden in the dark. Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's close collaborator, emphasized that the shadow is not always an enemy. Like any person, sometimes it requires love, sometimes resistance, sometimes compromise. The shadow becomes destructive only when it is ignored, dismissed, or misunderstood. Attention transforms hostility into dialogue, and dialogue creates integration. The shadow responds to recognition. When we deny its presence, it rebels through moods, irritability, or cruelty. But when we acknowledge it, even with discomfort, it softens. The qualities once feared become manageable. What was once chaos becomes a teacher. The shadow seeks relationship, not endless rejection. To see the shadow as only an opponent is to misunderstand its role. It is a companion in our journey to wholeness. By negotiating with it, we reclaim lost vitality and balance. Hostility fades not through suppression, but through engagement. The shadow needs to be heard. Jung often said that the treasure we seek is guarded by the dragon we fear. The shadow hides qualities that appear frightening but carry immense value. Confidence is hidden behind suppressed anger. Creativity hides beneath chaos. Compassion grows stronger when we confront cruelty within ourselves. The parts of us we exile often contain the very strength we need. The gold is hidden in the dark. By avoiding the shadow, we lose more than we protect. True growth demands we descend into the depths, retrieve the treasure, and return transformed and whole. Every myth tells this story. Heroes must enter caves, face monsters, and claim the prize. Jung saw these myths as symbols of psychological truth. Our gold lies in the same place as our fear. To find it, we must enter the shadow and embrace it fully. The irony is clear. What we most avoid contains what we most require. By reclaiming the gold in the shadow, we restore balance. The darkness becomes less terrifying when we realize it holds light. The shadow ceases to be prison and becomes pathway toward authentic self-discovery. Jung described shadow work as the realization of the shadow. This means identifying what lies hidden, naming it honestly, and allowing it to enter consciousness. It is not an easy process. It is a lifelong dialogue between ego and shadow, requiring honesty, courage, and humility. The work begins with awareness. Emotional reactions are the first clues. When rage, envy, or defensiveness arise, they signal the shadow. Instead of blaming others, you turn inward and ask why. Each uncomfortable feeling is a messenger pointing to a truth you tried to hide. Dreams also reveal the shadow. In them, the shadow often appears as a figure of the same sex, criticizing, mocking, or confronting you. These dream encounters are inner judges, voices from the unconscious demanding recognition. They remind you that wholeness cannot be achieved without dialogue with the dark. Shadow work is long and painful, like the labors of Hercules. It requires negotiation rather than domination. You cannot destroy the shadow, nor should you. You must face it, wrestle with it, and integrate it. Realization is not a single moment, but a daily practice of truth. Shadow work is not a battle to win quickly, but a long negotiation. It requires emotional honesty, the willingness to admit painful truths about yourself without excuses. Radical self-awareness means watching your reactions carefully and noticing how they reveal patterns of insecurity, envy, or hidden hostility. Dreams are powerful allies in this process. The unconscious often speaks through symbols and characters that criticize or challenge you. These dream figures act as mirrors, showing what your conscious mind refuses to admit. To listen to them is to open dialogue with the shadow in its raw form. Emotional honesty is perhaps the hardest discipline. Instead of projecting blame, you pause and ask why you are triggered. Is it their fault, or is it something you refuse to face? This practice dismantles illusions. Self-awareness grows sharper, and slowly the shadow loses its grip. Negotiating with the shadow means resisting pride. The ego always wants to appear pure, flawless, untouchable. Shadow work humbles the ego, forcing it to surrender its illusions. Each confrontation is uncomfortable, yet every moment of honesty is a step toward balance. Integration is achieved through persistence, not denial. Jung warned that the aim of shadow work is not perfection but wholeness. Perfection is an illusion created by the ego, a mask of purity that denies reality. Wholeness is the embrace of both light and dark, the integration of all parts of the self into balance. To strive for perfection is to repress flaws, which only strengthens the shadow. The more we try to appear flawless, the more we hide. But wholeness accepts imperfection as part of humanity. Integration means carrying both strengths and weaknesses with honesty, creating harmony instead of denial. Wholeness is liberating. You no longer waste energy pretending to be what you are not. Instead, you live authentically, aware of your flaws but not ruled by them. Shadows become teachers, weaknesses transform into wisdom, and the self grows unified. This balance is the true purpose of individuation. Perfection divides the self into acceptable and unacceptable. Wholeness dissolves that division. To be whole is to live in truth, to face the shadow without fear, and to walk forward carrying both darkness and light. This is not weakness. It is maturity. It is real human strength. The shadow cannot be defeated like an enemy on the battlefield. Attempts to destroy it only make it stronger. Repression feeds resistance. Denial deepens its hold. Jung taught that the path forward is not conquest but integration. Darkness is not annihilated. It is transformed. Integration means inviting the shadow into consciousness. Instead of fighting anger, you ask what it teaches. Instead of denying fear, you listen to its warning. By making the unconscious conscious, you reduce its destructive power. The dark becomes part of the whole, balanced by the light. The ego loves victory but fears humility. Integration requires surrender, admitting imperfection, and seeing the shadow not as a curse, but as a guide. Every step of acceptance weakens its autonomy. You regain control not by force but by dialogue. Mastery comes through union, not suppression. The punchline is clear. You do not conquer the dark, you integrate it. The shadow's existence is not proof of failure, but proof of humanity. The task is not to eliminate it, but to make peace with it. Wholeness arises when light and dark walk together. The shadow is not only personal, but collective. Entire societies repress what they refuse to see. This darkness erupts as violence, oppression, and denial. Wars, genocides, and cultural destruction are not accidents. They are the collective shadow expressing what has been ignored by generations. The collective shadow hides under attractive disguises. It appears in nationalism, in missionary zeal, in systems that silence diversity. What seems like progress often conceals domination. The more a culture denies its cruelty, the more that cruelty spreads. What is buried in society always returns multiplied. The denial of collective darkness creates historical blindness. People say, "Let us forget, let us move on." But the unacknowledged past festers. Pain that is silenced does not vanish. It is carried forward, poisoning descendants. The collective shadow punishes societies that refuse to face their truth. The warning is unmistakable. The same law that governs the individual governs the world. What is repressed comes back with force. A society that will not acknowledge its collective shadow inevitably repeats its crimes. The darkness of cultures is as dangerous as the darkness of individuals. The collective shadow becomes most visible in war. Armies march believing they fight for justice while committing atrocities that defy imagination. Entire nations fall under the spell of hatred, convinced that violence is noble. Behind banners and speeches, the shadow reveals its true face through bloodshed and despair. Genocides represent the shadow on its darkest stage. When fear and prejudice merge with denial, people commit acts they never thought possible. Ordinary citizens participate in extraordinary cruelty. This is not madness of a few, but the eruption of a collective shadow that overwhelms conscience and compassion. Cultural destruction is another form of shadow. Languages are erased, traditions forbidden, and entire peoples silenced in the name of progress. What appears civilized may conceal oppression. The shadow thrives when dominant groups deny the humanity of others. Each act of erasure adds to the collective darkness. These horrors are not confined to the past. They repeat whenever societies fail to face their history. Violence re-emerges under new names. Hatred wears new clothes. The shadow waits patiently, ready to resurface. Without conscious responsibility, humanity risks becoming the endless echo of its own forgotten crimes. The collective shadow often hides behind projection. A society denies its flaws and instead blames an external group. Minorities become scapegoats for the majority's fears. Hatred grows not because of who they are, but because they carry the darkness others refuse to admit within themselves. Projection fuels division. When people see weakness or corruption only in outsiders, they feel righteous while avoiding responsibility. This illusion unites communities temporarily, but the unity is built on lies. Hatred becomes a substitute for self-knowledge, and division becomes the price of denied collective truth. History is filled with examples. Religious groups accused of evil, ethnic minorities blamed for crises, and political opponents painted as monsters. Each time, projection turns neighbors into enemies. Each time the shadow grows stronger. Division thrives, but the underlying darkness remains unresolved and continues to poison society. The warning is clear. What we project onto others blinds us to our own faults. The more hatred is directed outward, the less progress is made inward. True healing requires honesty, not scapegoating. The enemy outside is only a mirror of the shadow still unacknowledged within. What society refuses to admit never disappears. It gathers in silence, feeding on denial until it erupts. Collective shadow returns as evil disguised as progress, as cruelty masked as duty. What is denied in daylight resurfaces in darkness, demanding recognition in the most destructive forms imaginable. The atrocities of history are lessons in denial. Every massacre, every act of cultural erasure, was once justified by noble words. Behind these illusions the shadow festered. Collective evil is not born suddenly. It grows in the silence of unacknowledged truth, waiting for its chance to dominate. Jung warned that humanity cannot escape its shadow. Without honesty, the dark side of society will always return. What is ignored in the present repeats in the future. The refusal to face evil ensures its rebirth. The courage to face it is the only prevention. The message is unavoidable. Collective denial is collective destruction. When a society rejects its shadow, it chooses blindness. That blindness leads to repetition of horror. What society refuses to admit does not vanish. It comes back with force, reminding us that truth avoided always becomes truth enforced. Nazi Germany stands as one of history's clearest examples of the collective shadow. Ordinary people surrendered to their personal shadows and became part of a mass psychosis. Fear, hatred, and resentment were projected outward, creating a movement where cruelty was celebrated and morality dissolved under ideology. Individuals who once lived ordinary lives found themselves committing extraordinary crimes. Neighbors turned against neighbors, friends betrayed friends, and entire communities justified persecution. This was not the work of a few monsters, but the collapse of conscience across millions. The personal shadow, ignored for too long, became collective evil. The transformation was subtle at first. Small compromises, silence in the face of injustice, participation in minor acts of cruelty. Each step seemed insignificant, but together they built a culture of horror. The shadow does not seize power overnight. It grows through the weakness of daily surrender. This lesson remains urgent. When individuals refuse to confront their own darkness, they become vulnerable to collective possession. A society of unconscious individuals invites tyranny. The bridge from personal shadow to collective catastrophe is built by ordinary people choosing denial over responsibility, comfort over truth, illusion over courage. The personal shadow is the seed. When multiplied across millions, it becomes the collective shadow. Each individual denial contributes to a greater darkness. The bridge between the two is built silently, step by step, until society awakens to a reality it no longer recognizes as human. What begins as private envy, fear, or prejudice grows into mass hatred when shared unchecked. Individuals who ignore their own capacity for cruelty become susceptible to collective ideologies. The shadow unites them, offering a false sense of belonging. In unity, hidden darkness scales into horrors unimaginable. The collective shadow exploits ordinary people. It whispers that cruelty is duty, that exclusion is justice, that violence is loyalty. When individuals obey without reflection, they surrender their conscience. The personal shadow then merges into a wave that destroys cultures, nations, and generations with devastating force. This is Jung's warning. To neglect inner work is to endanger the outer world. The cost of ignoring the shadow is not only personal suffering, but collective catastrophe. The bridge from personal denial to collective evil is always present. Only awareness and responsibility can prevent the crossing. History's darkest chapters were not written by a few villains, but by multitudes of unchecked shadows. When millions deny their own capacity for cruelty, their shadows unite. The result is war, genocide, and oppression. Unexamined darkness in individuals becomes unstoppable destruction when amplified by collective power. The tragedies of the 20th century illustrate this truth. Nations that ignored their shadows became instruments of terror. People who thought themselves incapable of evil joined movements that celebrated violence. The shadow left unchecked does not fade. It expands, consumes, and transforms human beings into agents of horror. Unchecked shadows are never harmless. They demand expression. If not faced consciously, they burst forth unconsciously. This eruption shapes history. From concentration camps to cultural extermination, the record is clear. What is not integrated individually reemerges collectively, leaving scars that echo for generations and redefine entire civilizations. The lesson is urgent for our time. Shadows ignored today may become disasters tomorrow. Jung's warning is not about the past alone, but the future. Every unexamined shadow carries the potential to shape history. To neglect it is to gamble with humanity's fate on the largest scale. Integration of the collective shadow begins with truth-telling. Atrocities cannot be buried under silence or forgotten in convenience. When societies deny their crimes, wounds remain open. Healing requires that victims, perpetrators, and bystanders confront the past openly. Only truth can cleanse what denial has allowed to fester for generations. Public apologies, reparations, and memorials are meaningful only when accompanied by honesty. Symbolic gestures cannot replace responsibility. Collective healing demands that every layer of society acknowledges complicity. Truth-telling strips away illusions and forces confrontation with uncomfortable realities. Without this step, integration is impossible, and history repeats itself. Truth-telling is painful. It requires listening to voices long silenced, admitting betrayal, and naming horrors that seem unspeakable. Yet pain is not the enemy. Silence is. By voicing suffering and hearing it without denial, societies create the conditions for real integration. Darkness cannot survive in the light of truth. Jung insisted that wholeness is impossible without recognition of evil. To face the shadow is to admit both capacity for good and capacity for crime. The courage to name atrocities honestly is the foundation of collective integrity. Without truth-telling, shadows remain hidden, waiting to rise again in violence. Taking responsibility for darkness is an act of liberation. When individuals and societies admit their failures, they prevent the burden from falling on future generations. Moral responsibility means acknowledging guilt. Political responsibility means reforming systems. Spiritual responsibility means carrying the weight consciously so others do not suffer in silence. Responsibility requires courage. It is easier to deny, to shift blame, or to forget. Yet denial only deepens the shadow. When a people claim their darkness, they transform it. The act of saying, "Yes, we did this," frees others from having to carry unspoken pain. Moral responsibility reminds us that apologies without change are empty. Political responsibility demands laws and institutions that prevent repetition. Spiritual responsibility accepts that evil belongs to humanity, not to faceless demons. Each layer strengthens the other, creating a culture where truth is carried instead of hidden. By embracing responsibility, we give future generations a lighter inheritance. They are not forced to carry shame disguised as silence. Instead, they inherit clarity, honesty, and a model of integrity. To bear our darkness consciously is to give others freedom. It is the ultimate act of service. The courage to face our darkness is not only for ourselves, but for those who come after us. When we confront the shadow honestly, we stop the cycle of denial. Children no longer inherit unspoken pain. They inherit truth, and truth gives them strength instead of confusion. Generations are chained when the past is hidden. Trauma repeats in silence. Hatred grows in denial. But when a people confront their crimes with clarity, the burden is lifted. Future lives are no longer defined by secrecy. They are freed by honesty carried bravely by those before them. Liberation begins with the first admission. To say aloud what was unspeakable is to break the curse of repetition. Victims are acknowledged, perpetrators are unmasked, and witnesses are heard. The shadow loses power the moment its truth is spoken. Courage becomes inheritance, and wholeness becomes possible. Jung's warning is timeless. Without courage, the shadow grows darker and passes silently from one generation to the next. With courage, the chain is broken. The gift of facing darkness is not perfection but freedom. It liberates generations and transforms history into a teacher rather than a prison. The first responsibility lies within. If individuals refuse to face their personal shadows, they unconsciously contribute to the collective shadow. Each denial adds to society's darkness. Jung insisted that confronting our own flaws is the only way to prevent them from spreading into collective violence and destruction. Acknowledging the personal shadow means watching reactions with honesty. When anger flares or envy bites, it is not just emotion. It is a signpost pointing toward hidden truth. By facing these signals, you disarm them. When ignored, they do not vanish. They leak into the world around you. Personal awareness protects society. When people recognize their inner darkness, they are less likely to project it onto others. Without projection, hatred loses fuel. Without projection, scapegoats disappear. The collective shadow grows weaker as individuals carry their own burdens instead of throwing them onto strangers. This is why inner work is never selfish. To acknowledge your personal shadow is to protect the community. Every act of self-honesty becomes a contribution to peace. The collapse into collective shadow begins when individuals neglect responsibility. Healing begins when one person dares to look within. Individuation is Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming whole. It is the alignment of conscious and unconscious, light and dark, strength and weakness. Instead of denying the shadow, individuation integrates it, creating balance. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means authenticity grounded in full self-acceptance. This process requires patience. The ego prefers simplicity, but individuation demands complexity. It asks us to hold contradictions, to be strong yet fragile, loving yet capable of anger, peaceful yet touched by rage. Integration means carrying these opposites without denial, allowing them to coexist in harmony. When individuation occurs, the shadow loses destructive power. Darkness no longer controls from the unconscious. Instead, it becomes conscious energy available for growth. Creativity blossoms, relationships deepen, and clarity emerges. By aligning light and dark, the self discovers stability. Individuation is not escape, but reconciliation of inner worlds. The gift of individuation extends beyond the self. A whole person strengthens families, communities, and cultures. Balanced individuals resist manipulation and refuse to project their darkness outward. In this way, individuation not only heals the person, but protects society. Light and dark together create strength for the world. Jung taught that light and shadow are inseparable. To chase light alone is to create illusion. Darkness gives light its meaning. Wholeness is not the absence of flaws, but the balance of opposites. Imperfection is not failure. It is proof of humanity and the path to authenticity. Every attempt to erase imperfection strengthens the shadow. The more we deny weakness, the more it grows. Perfectionism hides fear. Wholeness embraces reality. Integration means walking with both clarity and confusion, kindness and cruelty, courage and fear. It is the union of contradictions that creates strength. The shadow is not the enemy of light but its partner. Without shadow, light is flat, shallow, and lifeless. With shadow, light becomes radiant, the truth is clear. There is no light without shadow, and no wholeness without imperfection. This paradox defines the human journey. To accept this truth is liberation. You no longer fight yourself. You embrace the full spectrum of being. In that embrace lies peace. The struggle for perfection ends. The path to wholeness begins. Jung's final warning becomes a promise. In imperfection, we discover the beauty of wholeness.